This is the story of one of the oldest, most influential Black American families in Charleston, South Carolina, and about the important family corporation they built, the Fielding Home for Funerals. Julius P. Fielding opened the doors of his funeral home business on the northeast corner of King and Queen in 1912. He then moved the business to 61 Logan on the corner of Short Street to the home of his mother, Felicia Fielding Goodwin. Julius continued to run the business and soon married Sadie Gaillard. The two of them lived at the 61 Logan Street location with his mother and continued to run the business. The business grew, and in 1928, they acquired 122 Logan Street and relocated.
I guess the first thing I'd have to say is I literally grew up here. I was born on Cannon Street in the old Cannon Street Hospital. When my mother came home, home was on the third floor in that building up front. This is where we lived. People used to ask me all the time, was I afraid to be here? I was born here and lived here. As a child, I never had a chance to be afraid. As I look over there, those two plaques on the wall are long-time Fielding employees. They worked for my grandfather, but I knew them. I came to work here when I was 10 years old. Caskets in those days used to come in wooden boxes, and my first job was to paint the boxes. They promised me $1 a box, and they paid me 50 cents, but I went to school at Immaculate Conception Catholic School on Cumming Street, 200 Cumming Street. So every afternoon I could walk down Cumming Street and come right here, and that's what I did. That was my first job, was here. And all my life I have heard people telling me that they remember being in school and him sending the things over there at Christmas. Older people would say things to me like, I knew him, my grandfather. They were proud to have met him at all. And that rubbed off on me. I know for a fact that he was definitely a people person. This business was important to him, and I guess his family depended on it, but it wasn't the money for him. And most of his funeral accounts, when we go and look in those old account books, there are payments people made that would have the funeral, and then for a year or so afterward they would make payments. And a lot of them are even money, always even money.
These are our ledger books that we keep each and every family that comes through. The records of the personal information, and at time the arrangements are made, exactly what has gone on in the funeral arrangement process. So for records purposes, before computers of course, we would have these books, and they would store all of the vital information that we needed to conduct a funeral service for each and every family.
How far back do these records go?
We have some that go back to 1928, but they've since deteriorated, so I'm really not sure exactly what we have available here, but I would imagine going back to the 40s.
People would bring him produce from the garden, and he would say, thank you, and accept it as a gift. And then he would ask, not embarrass them, he would say, how much tomatoes going for these days? And they said, 10 cents a piece. And he said, well, I got 6. Then he'd take 60 cents off the funeral bill. A lot of people paid their funeral bill with vegetables and produce. Older people would say, yeah, I remember when my daddy died, we didn't have any money. We used to carry tomatoes down and pay the bill. This was not my grandfather's first venture into the funeral business. He was a partner with Mr. Edward Mickey on Cannon Street in the funeral home. Mr. Mickey later moved to, and I don't know when, I'm sorry, I don't know the dates, but Mr. Mickey moved to New York, to Harlem, and built the Mickey Funeral Home up there. And this was not the first funeral home. My grandfather's first funeral home was on the corner of King and Queen, somewhere in the vicinity of 82 Queen, where that restaurant is now. He moved from there to 61 Logan down the street, and they lived at number 4 Short Street, which was right behind 61 Logan, and then they moved up here much later. He bought this building and built the funeral home here. One of my earliest recollections was being lifted up by my father at 6 years old to pull the veil off of the plaque on the right. They had just finished this, and Miss Johnson mentioned that we were one big family. This chapel was built, I think, in 40-something, 48, maybe 40, I forget when. Remodeled in 54, and that's when I pulled the plaque off. My mother's uncle built this chapel, Mr. Wheeler. There were, my grandparents had 6 children. I'm reasonably certain there were 6 of them. I'm trying to count them. Emily was the oldest. I had an uncle, Julius, who drowned as a boy over on Johns Island. And there was Emily, Julius, Herbert, Dorothy, Timothy, and Bernard. Dorothy died as an infant. And Aunt Emily became the head of the family. And as a result, she also became the head of this business. My grandfather's will, at the time of his death, left this business to Mr. Rodolph and Dr. McFall. He intended that they sell it and divide the money up among his children. They, being rather astute businessmen, did not sell it. They bought it, and they ran it. And Mr. Mason and Mr. Brown, those 2 pictures up you see up front on the front office, ran it in the years that Aunt Emily and my father and the rest of the children were in school and went to college and came back. And when Aunt Emily came back and Aunt Emily and my father graduated from college, they sold the business back to the children at the same price they paid for it. And it was incorporated a few years after that became a corporation. And Mr. Mason and Mr. Brown were included in the as corporate owners. And also managed to adhere to what his will dictated, that it be sold. Aunt Emily was, to the best of my knowledge, Madam President. She was the president of the board from shortly after the corporation was formed until she died. She was also the shepherd who took care of her brothers. Their parents died. She was the one that was the family head. She was the matriarch and a part of this business from day one. A very important part of this business from day one. I guess I'd have to say I was always a bit jealous of the politics because it took him away from here. And when he was first elected to the House of Representatives, I was actually in Vietnam with the Marine Corps. When I came home, I went to embalming school, came to work here, and I think Ms. Johnson mentioned to you that he was gone 3 days a week. I was here for them 3 days a week. That became my job. That was shortly after I got here. And he just kind of said, all right, you take care of this, I'll be back Thursday night. Okay, fine. And that's how it went for a number of years. Most of the time he was in politics, I was here.
This here is just a put together of the James Island connector that was dedicated in my Uncle Herbert's name here, and the program from that ceremony and the picture that captured the cutting of the ribbon at that time.
So the connector's named after him.
Mm-hmm. The Herbert U. Fielding Connector, James Island Connector, because he was famous for connecting people of the Low Country.
Who's the little guy in the center?
That is, at the time, that was his youngest grandson, Freddie's son. His name is Palmer Fielding.
Smart looking kid.
Well, in my circles, amongst me and my brothers and my friends, that we don't call that the Fielding Connector. That's the Pony Jack Highway, which was his nickname. There was a movie about an Indian that was named Billy Jack, and daddy did something for somebody, and he said, need to make a movie and call it Boney Jack. Because he was skinny. I still meet people on frequently, or not, I don't want to say all the time, who will say to me something like, after I introduce myself, "Oh, you're Herbert Fielding's son?" "Yes." And "Oh, he's a great man, great man." There are other people who say to me, "My name is Ralph Brown. You buried my father." And I have to say, I did, because I don't remember a Mr. Brown, not in any kind of particular way. But the key to this entire funeral home and all of was people. It wasn't a business. It wasn't as much a family as it was one community that I'll give you an example. I went to that International African American Museum in Washington, and they got the back door of Esau Jenkins' van in there with "Hate is expensive, love is progress" written on it. And I'm standing there looking at it, and a woman who was in line behind me said to me, "You sure seem to be interested in that van." I said, "Lady, I used to ride in that truck." Because of Herbert Field. Yeah. Probably we don't use it anymore, but my grandfather started this place. When he started, those pencils that he gave away and the calendars, everything had what became Fielding Funeral Home's motto on it. And that motto was, "He profits most who serves best." And it still pops up on things around here now. I'm going through some old papers, and I saw it the other day, and I got a calendar home that I took home because it was on the calendar. But it says to me what an institution like this should be, and that is service first. And the profit part of it, the respect, the rest of it that goes to businesses that do well, that will come without you having to go look for it. That will come to you if you serve well. But service is the key. And that's all we did here. We served people here who had experienced the loss, and we helped them in little ways to cope with the loss, and we were rewarded for our service.
Barbara Johnson has been a staff member of the corporation for literally all of her adult life, serving for more than half a century. She raised her own children, her grandchildren, and now her beautiful great-grandchildren. This extended family, as we shall see, is quite a large one.
Fielding, may we help you? Well, she's got it.
It was a joy to have her share her story with us.
I graduated from Barnes Wilson High School, and then I went to Rice Business College, that was in North Charleston, and then I started working here. I came here in June of 1968, and during the summer before that, I had worked at the Custom House, and Miss Conchita Fielding worked there. And so I met her and worked with her. And I went back after I finished business school for a reference to get a job. And when I was leaving, she was coming down the stairs. And she said, "Barbara, what are you doing here?" I said, I came to get a reference from Mr. Humphreys. She said, "A reference?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm trying to get a job." She said, "Oh." She said, "We need someone at the funeral home." I said, "The funeral home?" And the only funeral home that I knew of at that time was North Area, because that's where I'm from, that area. And she called Emily Fielding. Emily Fielding came and picked me up, interviewed me, and hired me on the spot. And that's where I started, here at Fielding. But when I first started working here, the officers were Mr. Fred C. Brown, Mr. Charles Mason, Herbert U. Fielding, Emily Fielding was here, and Bernard was here, but he had his own law office at that time, so he wasn't here as often. But I learned a whole lot from the Fielding family, because I was fresh out of school and didn't know much of anything, especially where business was concerned. And so, especially Mr. Mason, he taught me about how to interact with the families. Herbert Fielding was running for the House of Representatives when I came here, because we helped him out on his campaign. In some instances, we did more work for him than we did for the funeral home. So we were in and out of that. And I learned my skills for the office here. And, you know, a whole lot of people used to come here back then, and the men and the officers here had so much history and so much knowledge. People would come in here during the daytime and just sit around and just enjoy just the atmosphere, you know. And I used to wonder, I said, do they do that at all funeral homes, you know? But yeah, it was a joy working with the people here. I saw how the community, how the other politicians would come in and ask for advice from him. And this was something that happened on a daily basis. You know, asking what his ideas were, what his opinion was on different ideas and all of that. And that happened for years, you know. Well, because when I came, like I said, he was in the House of Representatives. And so he would be gone for maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And when he came back, he was ready for the funeral home though. You know, he would get the schedules and work the schedules out, because we would be having like 4 and 5 funerals sometime on Saturdays, and sometime they had to double up on the funerals. So as soon as he got back in Charleston and got to this location, he was the funeral director. That's what showed that. Yes, but I did not, like I said earlier, follow his political career. But I do remember when he became Senator Fielding, and how everybody in the neighborhood really appreciated him, because he was, like I said, a community person. And all of them were. Yeah, they were community people, always trying to do something to help. Yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. You know, I think that when you're serving people, that you have to put yourself in their place, first of all. And you have to get a feel for them, because you can serve the same family over and over again, but every time they come it's different, because it's a different relative and the relationship is different, you know? And I was told by the officers here at Fielding that the family is always right, you know? Whether they're wrong, they're always right, you see? And you have to feel the empathy and the sympathy for them to see what they're going through. And when I talk with families, I always try to let them know that the Lord is with them, you see? Because, you know, everybody doesn't have a relationship with the Lord. So you try to interject that in there so that they will know that they always have someone to lean on. And that, you know, the funeral home is always here for you to help you in whatever way we can. But you have to depend on God, because He has the ultimate of everything, you see. And so I try to have a conversation with them about the Lord, the families that I serve. Oh yes, if I can get that in, I do that. Yes, and that's part of the ministry, as you said. That's right. That was one of their founding feelings, you know, that they cared about the public, that they cared about the people that came to them. You know, that's why we did the things that we did, to try to show appreciation, you know. Because, I mean, the founder, he used to give the kids fruits and all of that during the holidays, and they would get pencils and things for the children when they went back to school, and give to the children in the different areas and all of that. And then we got to a point where we would do fruit baskets for the families and all of that. So it was a way of showing that we care. I started in this building. When I first came here, I worked from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 9 at night when I first came here. And then when I got finished with school and all of that, I came on from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. And I stayed here until downtown area until about 76. I went up to Charlestonites for a while, to the North Area Chapel. And then Mrs. Cooper, Miss Jenny Lee Cooper, who was here for many years, she decided to retire. And when she left the funeral home, then I came back downtown. And I've been here, you know. We go back and forth from one location to the other according to what the business is, you know. So we do what is necessary to make sure that we serve the public. Whatever they need, we try to do what their needs are. And, you know, that's what it's all about, helping somebody. And that's the Fielding family. Our families coming in to be served for the loss of a loved one, we still celebrate them. And when everything is over, we hope and pray that we have provided peace for them. You see, that they can hopefully move on with their lives, and that they can see a future for themselves. So we look toward the future for ourselves and for them. I've been with Fielding Home for Funerals for 55 years, and I was just telling a coworker just last week that I wouldn't change anything. Even if I had a job that was offering me more, I think I learned more here than I could learn anywhere else. Because you interact with people, and people are so different, and they come from different spaces, and you just learn a whole lot about life, see? And when we would serve the families, we would have the older couples come in, and you really learn so much from them. Not just because they had death in the family, but you sit down and have a conversation about life, you see? So that's where I learned a lot about life, you see? Because I would have people come in and ask me, even after we had served them and they had settled everything, they wanted to know, can I call you? You can call me anytime. You see, I'm always available. I remember my mother telling me before she died that I should always stay at Fielding, and I'm glad that I did.
Bernard R. Fielding Sr., Herbert's younger brother, left the South for Boston University to study law in the 1950s. He returned to Charleston working in the legal profession and later assumed the positions of CEO and president of the Fielding Home for Funerals. Bernard Fielding was an accomplished attorney, and in 1990, he was elected as the first African American to serve as Charleston County probate judge. On April 1, 1960, 24 students from African American Burke High School quietly marched into Cress, Five and Dime, and staged a peaceful sit-in at the lunch counter. After 5 hours at the counter, they were arrested on trespassing charges. Within hours, bail was posted by J. Arthur Brown, head of the Charleston NAACP. The movement consisted of sit-ins and boycotts of King Street shops that would not hire African American workers. The King Street merchants relented, desegregating over 90 locations in 1963, and eventually the stores on King Street began to serve all races. Herbert and Bernard became active in the NAACP in 1965. Herbert founded the Political Action Committee of Charleston. PAC was formed to provide voter education and promote employment of African Americans to voter registration and school trustee boards. Both Herbert and Bernard are considered giants in the civil rights movement in Charleston. Another important member of the rather large extended Fielding family is Mr. Oscar Cicero Rutledge. Mr. Rutledge's son, Dr. Everard Rutledge, offered these personal reflections of how founder Julius Fielding extended his love to this neighborhood orphan boy.
Oscar C. Rutledge was born on February 19, 1919, in Charleston, South Carolina. He was born to Adeline Simmons Rutledge and Edward Rutledge. His early years were spent in what is now downtown Charleston on Short Street. Both of his parents passed away when he was a little boy. His older siblings cared for him after his parents' death. Being that he was a very young child in the neighborhood near the Fielding Home for Funerals, he became friends with the Fielding boys, Herbert, Bernard, and Timothy. Mrs. Sadie Fielding and her husband Julius, along with Julius's mother, Miss Emily Fielding, all took an interest in young Oscar. For all intents and purposes, he was raised by the Fieldings. It wasn't all fun and playtime, though. Dad recounts that he had many chores to do around the Fielding Home for Funerals. He recalled that he polished so much brass that his hands ached. As he got older, it became obvious that he was an adopted member of the family. In addition to his chores, my father was taught the art of embalming by Mr. W. K. Madison, the principal embalmer, and Mr. Fred Brown, funeral director and embalmer. Along the way, my dad also got his funeral director's license. The Fielding family so embraced Oscar that they sent him to Lincoln Academy in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, along with two of the Fielding boys, Timothy and Herbert, for his high school education. Oscar went on to attend A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. This was near Bennis College, where my mother, Dorothy, attended. But Dad did not graduate because of the war. At the outset of World War II, he, along with the other young Fielding men, entered the United States Army. Oscar served as sergeant in the Signal Corps because of his love for radios and other communication systems. My father always liked to tinker, building things with his hands, I'm told. At an early age, he built a radio in his own workshop. After World War II, he returned to Charleston and married Dorothy Sanders. The new Mr. and Mrs. Rutledge, along with many other African Americans, migrated north. They moved to New York City for better job opportunities and where many of his older siblings also lived. Oscar continued his craft in New York as the owner of Pioneer Radio and Television Repair, and as a funeral director and associate for Mickey's Funeral Home and Benta's Funeral in Harlem, New York. Oscar was also considered the New York ambassador for Fielding Home for Funerals, serving many Charlestonians who needed and wanted to return their deceased loved ones home to Charleston for their homegoing service. In 1986, Oscar and Dorothy returned to Charleston, and Oscar continued his funeral service activities with Fielding Home for Funerals as vice president. Oscar lovingly and faithfully continued to serve the Charleston community in his role at Fielding until his health declined in 1998 and he retired. My dad was such a wonderful person and inspiration to me that when I finished college, he insisted that I get my funeral director's license. I did, and also served as funeral director at Fielding whenever it was needed. Mr. Oscar Cicero Rutledge passed away on January 10th, 2002.
My name is Raquel Conchita Lawson Fielding. Well, we met at Hampton Institute at that time, Hampton University now. He was a senior and I was a freshman. And then we married the year after I graduated. He was in law school and lived in Boston, and I went there, and I was there his senior year. I was a secretary when we lived in Boston. I was secretary to the Anti-Defamation League. He was coming back to South Carolina, and he was very committed to passing the bar. He studied hard, reviewing 4 to 6 weeks, I think we had between when we left Boston and when he had to take the bar, but he passed it on the first try. Well, that particular time, he was the only black who passed the bar. He said he carried Matthew Perry's book bag when they did the case involved in the students who went, the Freedom students who were helping with voter registration, and they went to a picnic at Edisto, and of course they were promptly arrested because at that time the beach was segregated, and so he and Matthew Perry went before the magistrate down there to get them out of jail. And the magistrate told him, said, y'all ain't nothing but a bunch of communists. Well, I did what I could, and especially during the time that the kids in Charleston were sitting in at the various places and getting arrested, I was typing up depositions to get them out of jail. Well, he was qualified and had the experience, and his opponent was an insurance salesman, not even a lawyer. So I think it's very important. Who else would be able to help people with their legal problems? And that's what probate is. I mean, it's you're involved with people at the barest hardest times. Someone has died. They're negotiating what's left, families, property. And I think it takes someone with a basic knowledge of law to get through that.
I don't think most of the older funeral homes had money to be building buildings, in other words, so they would buy a house, or they would take their own house, in other words, and that's why it was called a home, you see what I'm saying? They would live on the upper stories. If it was 2 stories, they'd live on the second story. If it was 3, they would live on second and third, and the funeral home, of course, would have the entire first floor. That's the way it was here at 122 Logan Street, in other words. We lived on the second and third floor of this 3-story building, and we lived on the second floor of the 2-story building. And incidentally, this building is real Charleston history because, according to Herbert DeCosta, this was constructed about in the 1700s, in other words. This front part. The second part was a kitchen area, he says he thinks it was, and later on it was joined on to the 3-story building, you see. Well, my dad went to South Carolina State for a while, and then he was encouraged by family members to go to embalming school, and he left Charleston and went to New York City. In the picture which is right behind you, that I've shown you, in other words, Renard Training School for Embalming. Mm-hmm. And as you saw on that picture, there was one little brown face up in the corner, and that's him. Everything on the front row were the professors, and then there were other students there, of course. My recollection is that Mayth Fleming, who was affiliated with Halston Funeral Home, in other words, also was a graduate of that school. And I suspect that at that time, in other words, in early 1900s, that may have been probably one of the few schools that they could go to at that time. Well, my understanding is that family members and others encouraged him to go because really at that particular time, the white undertakers were not particular, in other words, about burying black people, you see what I'm saying? And it was a struggle, an awful struggle, because most of his clients that he started off with on James Island and Johns Island and the surrounding islands. And of course, in order to even get to those places, you had to go down to the Battery and get in a rowboat, okay, and go over to James Island in the rowboat, embalm the body one day, then they'd come back, and then the next day they would go over to the island, in other words, and have a funeral. So it wasn't something, I don't think, in other words, that our Caucasian funeral homes were interested in at that particular time, you see. Apparently he developed a passion and a love for it, and certainly his mother, Felicia Fielding Goodwin, was one of 3 ladies who were the founders of the Charleston, what is now the Charleston YWCA on Cumming Street, in other words. And that was again in the early 1900s. And she would get clothing from lots of people up in north, and she would get those boxes of clothing, and then she would distribute that to people on the islands, in other words. Certainly in the early 30s, in the Depression era, for example, my dad did a lot of bartering because we had a lot of sewing machines in the backyard. In other words, people didn't have any money, so he found other ways to get paid. And for your information, if you'd like to look up there on that other wall, you will see a funeral for Dr. Seabrook's wife that Herbert DeCosta was kind enough to pass on to us. And I think the entire funeral was a little over $300 and some. That's in the 1920s, in other words. Things have come a long way since then, as you can imagine. Yeah. But we're thankful that we've got right now, in other words, 3rd and 4th generation participating in the business, and we hope, in other words, that they will be able to carry on after we second generations are getting close to the grave, in other words, you see. Yeah. We've got 3 locations. This one is our principal downtown location that's been here, of course, since he bought this building in 1928. We also have a funeral home that we built from the ground up at the intersection of Old Meeting Street Road and Jacksonville Road. That was built in 1962 by Herbert DeCosta and designed by an architect. And then we have a building down on Highway 162, just past the town of Hollywood, but we actually are part of Hollywood, of the town of Hollywood, in other words. We built that. We renovated that building, because there used to be a church, in other words, in about 1989, as I recall. But I think that more so than just getting an education, you've got to have a love, you've got to have a passion, you've got to have some sort of feeling for what it is that you're getting into. Because if you're not happy and you're not pleasant with what you do from day to day, you might well get out of it, in other words. And certainly the funeral home business is not a business, in other words, for anybody to just jump into because they see the shiny cars, and they think, in other words, there's lots of money, in other words, in the business. You really have got to have a feeling for the public and be willing, in other words, to make tremendous sacrifices, because this business is 48 hours a day and 14 days a week. In other words, we've got a staff of full-time people and we've got a staff of part-time people, and they're constantly on the go, in other words, all the time, you see. And we sincerely hope, in other words, that it will continue to be a living legend for many generations in the future.
Bernard Fielding Jr., better known as Bernie to his friends, and his sister Constance gave us a deeper insight to what life was like growing up as a member of the Fielding family, and especially about their amazing parents, Judge Bernard and Mrs. Conchita Lawson Fielding.
When I think about my grandfather and my father, I can't help but think of the uncanny similarities that are a part of each of their lives. And my mind runs to the idea or the concept that we as black folks have to be twice as smart, twice as strong, and work twice as hard just to get a fair shake at bat. And thinking of that, it blows my mind. And back in the 1900s, to have the resources, networking, and the ability and means to start his own business once he came back from embalming school. And to do that at the first location at 61 Logan Street and 4 Short Street, and then ultimately to where the funeral home has been today at 122 Logan Street, and moving there in 1928 as a sole proprietorship initially. And to do that and to be successful for all these years, it's mind-boggling, I have to say. But it's a testament to the legacy of the hard work that has been put in and the appreciation from the community.
What's the slumber room?
Slumber room is when the body has been put in the casket and then the families are coming for first viewing.
Oh.
Or if the family wanted to use our chapel for services, or while waiting to take the remains to the church. And to be up for display where people could come during a wake and view the remains.
Slumber room.
Yeah. And here is the morgue.
Wow.
Now there were other embalming tables at those stations where the drains and the sinks were, but they were portable. But this was a built-in unit here that had the drain actually in the base. And this was a dressing table, cooling board, made out of solid marble. It was an early embalming table because it had the drains here. But we would use it to dress bodies. Non-stop action. And all the tables were filled and on gurneys and everything. But this hallway is kind of behind the scenes, so all the way in the back was the warehouse. And so you had this hallway, the chapel is here, but the hallway where you could take the caskets from the warehouse, come into the morgue, and you can exit out into the slumber rooms for viewing. And as well as bringing the caskets from the warehouse, this ramp here drops down and you would be able to take the caskets up to the second floor. And I think it's an ingenious setup because a lot of places you see would have like elevators or lifts to get to a second story, but I always thought that this was a unique idea with this ramp that comes down. So this one was kind of good. And believe it or not, things like this, stick out as memories. So you have the control here. And door right there, you have access to the casket display room.
Wow.
It's just to mirror design of it, the length of it, where it's not too steep, where you struggle to get it up there, and it's a unique thing to me.
It is. It is. And then so you bring your client here, and then you bring your casket down from here.
From there, or add one from inventory in the back to the warehouse. And when you're done, put the ramp up, and if you were transporting one from the display room into the morgue to put a deceased body in, and
that's cool. That's awesome. Cool.
It's a multi-faceted type of environment. Yeah, sure. And it has served an integral part of the community over the years. And I think that can be contributed to the fact of the legacy that my grandfather put down all those many years ago of reaching people on a personal level. And I think that appreciation of the clients and families that he served, if they weren't able to make monetary payment, there was use of the barter system. And at Christmas time, my grandfather would pass out these baskets with the fruits and pencils and all that. And we like to joke and say, those fruits and pencils still serving us to this day, but it's a testament of once people see the devotion and care and concern you have for them personally, and the sincerity, that you get it back tenfold, And I just think that over the years, as people and families have made the decision that this is my family undertaker, and that notion sticks and stays throughout the decades, and it's serving us well now and well into the future as a legacy that was left behind. And all we can do as this generation is try to add on it and build upon what was already established, and just carry on with that legacy of service.
I mean, growing up with my parents was amazing. They were incredibly strong and just accomplished people. They always instilled in us, our moral base, having an ethical base about work and school and things that you dedicated yourself to. They really instilled the importance of education and family. We traveled a lot together, did a lot as a family. I graduated from Bishop England, as did my brother, and I went on to Francis Marion University, and then I finished up at Charleston Southern. So when I think about my grandfather and the stories about him bringing about the funeral home, and how they kind of had like a barter system for people who couldn't afford a funeral, it just instills, it kind of backs up what the importance of family and helping the community that my parents carried on. Just to hear how they wouldn't turn anybody away, and whatever you could do, whatever you could give, they made sure that that family was able to lay their loved one to rest with dignity, and they did it with pride and with gratefulness to be able to help the community and give back. So that gives me a lot of pride of being a Fielding, and it set the tone for what our parents raised us on. When it comes to thinking about my father in regards to his father, one of the main things that comes to mind is, as a Black man, striving to make the accomplishments that he made, making sure that you're giving back and supporting your community, and being there for one another is one thing that comes first to my mind. My dad always made sure that everybody was good and as best as they could be. He would do anything for anybody and give you the shirt off of his back. And he was humble. He never carried himself as though he was better than anybody, although all of his accomplishments far exceed what a lot of people have been able to accomplish. He was just an amazing man, and it would take a lot to follow in his footsteps, as with his father. My mother was an amazing mom, a woman of color. The accomplishments that she made in U.S. Customs, but especially as a mom, as a wife, she definitely set the tone for me in raising my own children. And what I would want for myself, she instilled in us to, be the best you can be, do the best you can do, but, always carry yourself with your head held high. When I think about my mom, I think about my two girls, and just wanting them to always be proud of who they are, to do the best that they can do, and to never feel like there's any limit on anything in their life, to be proud to be young Black women, and to just always push forward no matter what adversities stand in front of them.
We at Builders of Our Heritage Community Television would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Bernard Fielding, Bernie to us, for asking us to be a part of preserving and presenting his incredible family story. It is both an honor and a privilege for us to be able to bring the story of the oldest Black American family corporation in the state of South Carolina for all to see and appreciate. The Fielding Home for Funerals truly is one of the builders of our heritage. Thank you so much for joining us, and may God bless you all.